The arena goes silent. 79 feet. That's not a basketball court anymore. That's a different sport entirely. But Caitlin Clark doesn't see distance the way other players do. What should be impossible becomes inevitable the moment the ball leaves her fingertips. The crowd doesn't even have time to process what they're watching before the net ripples and the entire internet loses its mind. This wasn't just a highlight. This was a statement. A moment that forced everyone to stop and ask the question that's been building all season. Who exactly is this 22-year-old rookie, and how is she playing a completely different game than everyone else on the floor? When you watch the footage back, the first thing that strikes you isn't the distance, it's the confidence. Clark is dribbling near half court with absolutely no hesitation in her body language. The clock is running down. The pressure is immense. Defenders are closing in. Most players in this situation panic or settle for a contested three-pointer at the logo. Clark does something different. She takes a breath, reads the defense one more time, and then launches from 79 feet out like she's shot from that range 100 times before. The ball arcs through the air with perfect rotation. It's not a lucky heave. It's not a desperation shot. It's calculated. It's precise. It's the kind of shot that only happens when a player has practiced it so many times that muscle memory takes over and confidence becomes muscle itself. The commentators can barely get the words out. The crowd erupts before the ball even touches the net. And when it does, when that ball drops clean through the basket with seconds remaining, the entire arena loses it. But more importantly, the entire internet loses it. Within minutes, the clip is everywhere. Social media explodes. Basketball analysts are running the footage back over and over, trying to understand the physics of what just happened. Former NBA players are tweeting about it. International basketball communities are sharing it. The clip gets millions of views in hours. Caitlin Clark's name trends worldwide. And suddenly, everyone who thought they understood what women's basketball could be has to reconsider everything. Here's what makes this moment even more significant than just the shot itself. It's the culmination of something much bigger. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a lucky bounce from a player who doesn't belong at this level. This was an exhibition of pure skill from someone who has been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. The 79-footer becomes the symbol of something that's been building throughout the entire season. A complete revolution in how basketball is being played. What's fascinating is the reaction it creates. Coaches start studying her tape.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Defensive coordinators are scrambling to figure out how to guard someone whose range has essentially eliminated the concept of a safe distance on the court. Other players are watching and realizing that the game they thought they understood has just evolved into something completely new. The traditional three-point line, which was supposed to be the ultimate deep range, suddenly feels like an arbitrary rule that doesn't apply to Clark. The moment also reveals something psychological about Clark that becomes increasingly obvious as you study her game. She doesn't shoot the deep three-pointers because she's desperate or because it's a low-percentage play. She shoots them because she genuinely believes they're going in, and that belief is contagious. Her teammates feed off it. The crowd feeds off it. Even opponents seem affected by it. When you're playing defense against someone who legitimately might shoot from 79 feet, it fundamentally changes how you approach the game. What's really interesting is how this shot crystallizes the conversation around her entire playing style. For weeks, people have been wondering if she's sustainable at the professional level. Questions linger about whether her range will hold up against elite-level spacing and defensive intensity. Skeptics wonder if this is a novelty that will eventually be figured out. But then she hits a 79-foot buzzer beater, and suddenly all those doubts feel premature. This isn't luck. This isn't a hot streak. This is someone operating at a different level. The internet didn't just go crazy because of the distance. It went crazy because the moment represented a shift in what's possible. It was the ultimate statement. Clark wasn't just playing basketball, she was redefining it. And everyone watching knew they were witnessing something that would be remembered for years to come. The 79-foot shot became more than a highlight. It became a turning point in how the world sees women's basketball and what one player can accomplish when confidence meets skill at the highest level. To understand Caitlin Clark's explosion onto the professional scene, you have to go back and look at where she came from and the legitimate doubts that surrounded her arrival. When she was drafted by the Indiana Fever, the excitement was real. But so were the questions. Women's basketball had seen talented rookies before. The league had experienced phenomenal young players. But there was something different about Clark from day one, something that made longtime observers uncomfortable because it didn't fit the traditional mold of what a women's basketball star was supposed to look like. The hype around her college career had been unprecedented. She broke records. She won games single-handedly. She took Iowa to levels the program had never reached before. But here's the thing that professional scouts and analysts were quietly wondering. Would any of that actually translate? College basketball and professional basketball are completely different animals. The spacing is tighter. The athleticism is higher. The defensive intensity is relentless. Young players who dominate at the college level often struggle to adjust to the professional game. The transition has humbled countless talented rookies before. Reports suggest that even some within the basketball community had reservations about whether Clark's playing style would work at the professional level. Her shooting range, which was her greatest strength in college, was seen by some as potentially overrated. The thinking was that professional defenders would close out faster, that the three-point line would be contested differently, that she wouldn't have the same freedom she enjoyed in the college game. Skeptics pointed to other high-volume shooters who had struggled in their first professional seasons. The assumption was that Clark would need to adjust, adapt, and probably take a year or two to find her rhythm in the pros. But from her very first game, it became clear that the doubts were misplaced. Clark didn't need an adjustment period. She didn't struggle with the transition. Instead, she walked onto the professional court and immediately showed that her college success wasn't a product of her competition level. It was a product of genuine, elite-level skill. The moment she stepped onto the floor, defenders realized they had a completely different problem on their hands than they anticipated. What made her rise particularly striking was how quickly she commanded respect. Usually, rookies need time to prove themselves. They need to show consistency over multiple games, multiple weeks, sometimes multiple months. Clark needed about 1 quarter. From her very first possession, she was operating with complete confidence. She was pushing pace. She was hunting shots. She was making plays. And most importantly, she was making them look easy. Defenders would give her space because they were worried about her three-point range, and she'd drive. They'd press up on her, and she'd hit a three-pointer from deeper than anyone thought was reasonable. There was no defensive adjustment that worked against her because every adjustment created a different problem. You can't double-team her without leaving shooters open. You can't play her tight without getting beaten by her handles. You can't back off without getting torched from distance. She had essentially solved the defensive puzzle before opposing teams even knew there was a puzzle to solve. The narrative started to shift immediately. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether she could hang at the professional level. The question became how good could she actually become? Comparisons started emerging to legendary players. People were talking about Steph Curry, about Larry Bird, about the greatest shooters in basketball history. And while those comparisons might seem extreme for a rookie, they started to feel less ridiculous the more you watched her play. She was doing things that even those legendary players didn't do with the same consistency. She was operating at a level that forced basketball people to recalibrate their expectations. What's particularly interesting is how she handled the pressure of those expectations. There's a weight that comes with being hyped the way Clark was hyped. There's a target on your back. Opposing teams specifically prepare game plans to stop you. Your every mistake gets analyzed. Your every success gets dissected. But instead of buckling under that pressure, Clark seemed to thrive under it. The brighter the spotlight, the better she played. The more defenders keyed in on stopping her, the more creative and devastating her performances became. The rise of Caitlin Clark wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow build where she gradually proved people wrong over the course of a season. It was immediate. It was explosive. It was undeniable. From day one, she showed that all the hype, all the expectations, all the comparisons to legendary players, they weren't overblown. If anything, they were understated. Because what she was doing on the professional court was something that had rarely been seen before in women's basketball. She was doing what people said couldn't be done, and she was doing it better than anyone expected. If you want to understand what makes Caitlin Clark fundamentally different from other elite shooters in basketball, you have to understand her shooting range. This isn't about hitting threes. Every professional basketball player can hit threes. This is about what happens when someone's three-point range extends so far beyond what's considered normal that it breaks the entire defensive framework of the game. The traditional three-point line exists at a specific distance because it was designed to create balance in basketball. Shoot from close range and you get 2 points. Shoot from behind the line and you get 3. It's a system that's worked for decades because it creates a natural risk-reward calculation. Teams have to make decisions about how much they want to pressure shooters beyond the three-point line because if they overextend, they give up easier scoring opportunities closer to the basket. Clark obliterates this calculation. Her effective three-point range doesn't stop at the line. It extends 5 feet beyond it, 10 feet beyond it, 15 feet beyond it. And because she's making these shots with consistency, she's forcing defenders to account for range that has never been systematically accounted for before in women's basketball. When she dribbles up the court, defenders can't just worry about her pulling up at the three-point line. They have to worry about her shooting from half court. They have to worry about her shooting from distances that seem absurd until you watch her make them repeatedly. What's fascinating from a defensive standpoint is the impossible position this creates. If you play her tight to try to contest shots, she has the handles and athleticism to drive past you and create scoring opportunities closer to the basket. If you back off and give her space, she confidently launches from 25, 30, 35 feet out. There's no sweet spot for defenders because she's essentially eliminated the concept of a safe distance on the court. Every inch of the floor within her range is a potential scoring opportunity. Every decision a defensive player makes creates a different problem. The comparisons to Steph Curry become relevant here, but they also miss something important. Curry revolutionized basketball by extending the three-point range and making deep threes a consistent offensive weapon. But even Curry, as great as he is, operates within certain parameters. There are distances where even he becomes uncomfortable. There are ranges where the percentage drops enough that teams can live with it. Clark seems to have fewer of those thresholds. Her confidence extends to distances that seem to defy probability. What's particularly striking is how she's arrived at this skill. This isn't accidental. This isn't something that happened naturally because she's talented. Reports suggest that she spent years working specifically on her shooting from extreme distances. This is the result of deliberate practice, thousands of repetitions, and a commitment to mastering something that most players never even attempt at a professional level. She's trained her body to shoot from ranges that most coaches would discourage, and then she's made it work at the highest level of competition. She's essentially created a skill that didn't exist in women's basketball before. The impact on the game is immediate and measurable. When Clark is on the floor, opposing teams have to adjust their entire defensive scheme. They can't play traditional pick-and-roll defense because the spacing requirements change completely. They can't use zone defenses effectively because those defenses are built on the assumption that players will shoot from certain ranges. They can't use help side defense because helping would leave her open for a deep three from seemingly anywhere on the court. What's really interesting is watching how this forces other players to play differently too. Her teammates suddenly have more space because defenders are so worried about Clark's range that they have to overextend to contest her. When she drives to the basket, help defense comes more slowly because teams are terrified of leaving her open for a deep three. She essentially creates offensive opportunities for everyone around her simply by existing on the court and forcing defenses to operate in unfamiliar territory. The spacing that she creates is almost like having an extra player on the court. Her teammates aren't just getting better looks because of good ball movement. They're getting better looks because the entire defense has collapsed in on itself, trying to account for Clark's range. A player who would normally be covered by two defenders might find himself with a completely open lane because one of those defenders has to stay with Clark from 30 feet away. The range that Clark has developed isn't just a skill. It's a strategic advantage that changes how basketball is played. It forces rule discussions. It forces teams to rethink defensive philosophy. It forces coaching to adapt to something that wasn't supposed to be possible at the professional level. And every time she launches from 30 feet out and hits nothing but net, she proves that the game itself is evolving and she's leading that evolution. The three-point line, which was revolutionary when it was introduced, is starting to feel like it's become too close to the basket for what Clark is capable of. Here's what separates good scorers from great players: the ability to make everyone around you better. Caitlin Clark could have been just a shooter. She could have developed her range, come into the league, and spent her entire career taking contested threes from ridiculous distances. That would have been impressive enough. But that's not what she does. Because underneath all the deep shooting and all the highlight moments, Clark is a basketball player first. And that distinction matters enormously. Her playmaking is what elevates her from a really good scorer to a transformational player. And what's interesting is that her playmaking doesn't operate the way most elite playmakers operate. When you think of great passers in basketball, Steve Nash, John Stockton, LeBron James, you think of players who methodically move the ball around, creating opportunities through ball movement and spacing. Clark does that, but she also does something different. She uses her scoring gravity to create playmaking opportunities. Because defenders are so focused on stopping her from shooting, they overcommit to her defensively. And when they overcommit, lanes open up. Space develops. Teammates become available for easy baskets. The no-look passes that have become her signature aren't flashy for the sake of being flashy. They're the natural result of defenders being so focused on her that they don't notice her setting up her teammates. She's weaponizing defensive attention and converting it into assists. She's turned the defense's obsession with her into an offensive advantage for her team. What's particularly remarkable is her court vision. When she's driving to the basket and defenders collapse around her, she has the vision to find teammates in positions where they're completely open. She sees angles that other players don't see. She understands spacing at a level that you'd expect from a veteran point guard, not a 22-year-old in her first professional season. And because she's a threat from anywhere on the court, the passes she makes are worth more than they might seem on a stat sheet. She's setting teammates up for easy baskets because defenders had to leave them to go stop her. The psychological impact of having a teammate who can both score and facilitate at her level cannot be overstated. When you're playing next to Clark, you get more opportunities. Your spacing improves because defenses have to account for her range. Your scoring opportunities become easier because defenders are constantly worried about her. She elevates the entire offense just by being on the floor. And then she makes her teammates better when they do touch the ball. Reports from teammates suggest that playing alongside Clark changes how you think about basketball. Suddenly, you're getting open looks you might not normally get. Suddenly, you're getting the ball in better positions because she has the vision to find you. She's the kind of player who makes everyone around her feel like they're better than they actually are. And that's not because she's making amazing passes, though she does that. It's because she's so threatening as a scorer that defensive systems break down in her presence. What's fascinating is watching her read defenses in real time. She'll come off a screen, and instead of immediately shooting, she'll recognize that help defense has committed to her. She'll see the open teammate. She'll deliver the pass. And then the next possession, when defenses adjust to account for her playmaking, she'll immediately attack and score. She's operating one step ahead of the defense at all times. That's the hallmark of a truly elite basketball player. The combination of scoring and playmaking makes her nearly impossible to defend. Because you can't just stop her from shooting, you have to worry about her passing. You can't double team her without her finding the open person. You can't play her tight without her driving and creating even more opportunities. You can't back off without her shooting over you. She's essentially turned basketball into a choose-your-own-adventure game where every defensive choice creates a different problem for the opposing team. Her assist numbers have been climbing throughout the season, and what's remarkable is that they're not just numbers on a stat sheet. Every assist represents a moment where she made the right decision in a split second. Every assist represents a teammate who benefited from her decision-making. Some of her assist numbers are coming from traditional passes, but many of them are coming from her gravity creating space for cutters or off-ball shooters. She's redefining what an assist can be. What makes this particularly special is that she's doing this at 22 years old. She has years of development ahead of her. She's already operating at an elite level in both scoring and playmaking. As she continues to grow and understand the game at deeper levels, the possibility exists that she could become even more effective as a facilitator. The scary thing for opposing teams is that Clark hasn't even reached her ceiling yet. She's already transformational. She's already making everyone around her better. But the version of her that we'll see in 3 years, in 5 years, could be something completely different and completely unstoppable. There's a fundamental difference between playing well when everything is flowing and playing well when everything is on the line. Statistics become meaningless in those moments. The crowd noise becomes deafening. Every possession feels like it matters infinitely more than it actually does. This is where championships are won or lost. This is where legends are made or unmade. And this is where Caitlin Clark does something truly exceptional. When the game is close and the pressure is at its highest, Clark doesn't shrink. She gravitates toward the moment. She wants the ball, she wants the responsibility, and more importantly, she delivers. There's a psychological component to this that's difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore when you watch her play. Some players play tighter in pressure situations. Their mechanics change. Their decision-making becomes more conservative. Their confidence wavers. Clark does the opposite. The higher the pressure, the more controlled she becomes. The bigger the moment, the more confident she looks. Watch what happens late in close games. Opposing defenses are tight. Everyone in the arena knows that Clark is going to try to take over the game. The defense specifically game plans for her. They throw multiple defenders at her. They attempt to limit her touches. And then she makes a move that completely changes the momentum. It's not always a three-pointer. Sometimes it's a perfectly timed drive. Sometimes it's a no-look pass that swings the game in the other direction. But there's a consistency to how she performs when the stakes are highest. The footage of her performances in the fourth quarter of close games tells a story of someone who has an almost supernatural ability to elevate her play when it matters most. What's interesting from a psychological standpoint is that Clark seems to thrive on pressure rather than being burdened by it. Sports psychologists often talk about the concept of flow state, that perfect zone where an athlete is completely locked in and performing at their absolute best. Clark seems to access flow state more readily in pressure situations than in blowouts. When the game is decided, she plays well. When the game is on the line, she plays exceptionally. The confidence never wavers. You can see it in her body language. You can see it in how she approaches the ball. You can see it in her eyes when she's looking at defenders. There's no hesitation. There's no self-doubt. There's just certainty that whatever she's about to do is going to work out. And because she carries that confidence so visibly, it affects her teammates. It affects the opposing team. It affects the entire energy of the arena. When your star player is completely calm in a high-pressure situation, it has a ripple effect throughout the entire organization. Teammates believe they're going to win. Coaches believe they're going to win. The crowd believes they're going to win. Clark's presence in those moments is like a pressure valve that keeps everyone from panicking. Reports from coaches and players suggest that this kind of pressure performance is something you can't teach. You either have it or you don't. Some players are born with the ability to compartmentalize pressure and perform anyway. Others struggle with it their entire careers. Clark appears to be in the first category. She's wired differently than most players when it comes to high-stakes situations. The moment doesn't rattle her. The attention doesn't overwhelm her. The responsibility doesn't paralyze her. It energizes her. What makes her pressure performances even more impressive is the level of defensive intensity she faces. Teams game plan specifically to stop her in crucial moments. They know she's a threat. They know she can take over, so they commit extra resources to her. They send double teams. They press up on her tighter. They get physical. And despite all that attention, she still finds ways to impact the game. She still finds open teammates. She still creates scoring opportunities. She still performs. There's also something interesting about how she manages the emotional roller coaster of professional sports. Professional basketball is a game of runs. One moment you're down 5, the next you're up 3. Momentum shifts constantly. Most players get caught up in these swings. Their confidence builds and crashes based on recent results. Clark seems immune to that. Whether she just hit 3 threes in a row or just missed 3 threes in a row, her approach to the next possession is identical. There's a baseline confidence that doesn't fluctuate. She's not feeling high after makes or low after misses. She's just executing her game plan possession after possession. The pressure performances also reveal something about her maturity as a player. She's only 22 years old, but she plays with the composure of a veteran. She doesn't panic. She doesn't force shots in pressure situations. She makes intelligent decisions. She takes what the defense gives her, and when they overcommit to stopping her, she punishes them. That's the mark of someone who has exceptional basketball intelligence combined with exceptional pressure performance ability. Most rookies don't have that combination. Most veterans don't have that combination. Clark has it in spades. No story about an elite athlete is complete without acknowledging the complications that come with stardom. Caitlin Clark's rise has been meteoric, but it hasn't been without its share of complications and concerns that observers have started to whisper about more frequently as the season progresses. Understanding these elements is crucial to understanding the full picture of who she is and what her future might look like. First, there's the question of intensity and how it manifests on the court. Clark plays with an aggressive edge that sometimes crosses into controversial territory. Reports indicate that she's accumulated technical fouls at a rate that suggests her competitive fire occasionally gets the better of her on-court interactions. Some of these technicals have been for arguing calls. Others have been for general demeanor and intensity. What's interesting is that these technicals don't seem to affect her performance. If anything, they suggest someone who cares deeply about winning and isn't willing to accept what she perceives as injustice. The competitor in her burns hot. But there's a legitimate question worth asking. As she continues her professional career, will this intensity become a problem? Will opposing teams start to use her competitive nature against her, trying to provoke technicals that could swing games? Will the physical and mental toll of playing with such high intensity eventually lead to problems on or off the court? These are speculations, but they're the kind of speculations that analysts and coaches are quietly discussing when the cameras aren't rolling. Then there's the injury question, which is far more serious and legitimate. Reports emerged about a right knee injury that surfaced during preseason play. The evaluation initially suggested a 2-week recovery timeline. But injuries in basketball are unpredictable. The recovery can take longer. The rehab can be complicated. The return to full strength can take even longer than that. The concern isn't necessarily about this specific injury, though any injury to a young player is worth monitoring closely. The concern is about durability over a long career. Clark's playing style, while incredibly effective, is also physically demanding. She's constantly attacking the basket. She's making sudden directional changes at high speeds. She's exploding into jump shots from extreme distances. She's driving hard to the lane and absorbing contact from defenders. She's flying around the court playing aggressive defense. Over the course of a long professional career, this kind of high-intensity play can accumulate wear and tear on joints and muscles. Knees take damage, ankles get tweaked, shoulders get sore. The human body has limits. The question that medical professionals and team officials are likely asking is, can her body sustain this level of intensity for the next 10, 12, 15 years? It's not a small question. It's a question that determines whether she's a star for a couple of years or a legend for 2 decades. Rumors online suggest that some in the basketball community are watching her knee recovery particularly carefully, not because this specific injury is necessarily serious, but because it's a data point. If she has another injury next season, then a pattern starts to emerge. If she stays healthy, then the durability concerns were overblown. Right now, we're in the middle of that story, and nobody knows how it ends. What's also worth considering is the mental toll of being constantly pursued by opposing defenses and constantly in the spotlight. Clark is 22 years old and operating at a level of professional basketball where every mistake is analyzed. Every game is filmed. Every decision is scrutinized. The pressure to maintain excellence is immense. The pressure to live up to the hype that surrounds her is constant. Some players thrive under that pressure. Others eventually burn out from the weight of expectations. There's also the question of how her playing style might be affected if she has to modify her game due to injury or fatigue. What if she can't take the same hard drives to the basket because her knee isn't quite right? What if she can't explode into jump shots the same way because of soreness or conditioning? What if her range has to be shortened due to physical limitations or caution from her coaching staff? These are worst-case scenarios, but they're the kind of scenarios that happen to professional athletes with regularity. Reports suggest that her team is being cautious about her recovery and integration back into full competition. They understand that protecting her long-term health is more important than any single game or season. But there's also pressure to have her on the court, because she's so transformational that her absence is felt immediately. It's a delicate balance between being aggressive with her return and being smart about her health. Beyond the physical, there's also been recent coverage of absences that haven't been fully explained. A game in Portland disappeared from the schedule with vague medical language. No timeline was provided. No specifics were given about what was being addressed. Her head coach couldn't answer direct questions about the situation in a way that felt complete or transparent. These kinds of unexplained absences raise questions that go beyond simple injury management. They suggest there might be more going on than what's being communicated publicly. There's also a documented pattern of rotation decisions that have raised eyebrows among analytical observers. Late-game substitutions that seem unusual. Moments where Clark is benched right after hitting clutch shots. Game plans that don't seem designed to maximize her abilities. These decisions come from the coaching staff, which means they're organizational decisions. And when organizational decisions consistently seem to work against your best player's development or in game effectiveness, it creates a narrative that's hard to ignore. The complications don't diminish what Clark has already accomplished. They simply add complexity to her story. She's not just a basketball player who plays well and nothing else happens. She's a human being navigating the demands of professional sports at the highest level. And that navigation includes managing intensity, managing injuries, managing expectations, and managing the psychological weight of being one of the most watched and discussed athletes in women's basketball. If you want to understand what's really happening with Caitlin Clark beyond the highlights and the statistics, you have to look at the organizational layer. Because being the most talented player on a team doesn't automatically mean everything will go smoothly. Sometimes the best players end up in situations where the infrastructure around them doesn't match their level. There have been reports circulating throughout the season that suggest tension exists between Clark and her coaching staff. Now, these are reports and speculations, so it's important to frame them carefully. But the evidence is starting to accumulate in ways that are hard to ignore. It's the kind of situation where you're watching patterns emerge and those patterns start to tell a story. The Indiana Fever organization has had documented issues this season. The league issued a formal WNBA warning for reporting violations. There have been multiple disciplinary actions in a single week. These aren't small things. These are organizational problems that suggest something isn't functioning smoothly behind the scenes. And when your franchise player is involved in an organization going through that kind of turbulence, it affects everything. There's also been documented discussion about rotation decisions that have raised questions among people who analyze basketball professionally. Late-game substitutions where Clark is pulled at moments that seem tactically questionable. Game against Portland where she sat out with medical language that was vague enough to raise eyebrows. Game plans that seem designed to limit her involvement rather than maximize it. These decisions come from the coaching staff, which suggests either a philosophical difference about how to develop the player or something else going on beneath the surface. What's particularly interesting is her body language in press conferences. Her language has become more precise, more guarded, less effusive about her situation. When a young player starts becoming more careful about what they say publicly, it can signal that something is shifting in how they feel about their organization. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict, but it does suggest caution. It suggests she's thinking about what she's saying in ways she might not have been earlier in the season. Her contract situation is not a background detail in this analysis. It's the organizational forcing function that makes every other documented element time-sensitive. She has not publicly committed to an extension with the team. In a league where star players often sign long-term deals with their teams, her hesitation to do so says something. It suggests she's keeping her options open. It suggests she's evaluating whether this organization is the right place for her future. When your best player isn't willing to lock in long-term, it's a signal that something needs to change. The head coach is operating with what appears to be a philosophy that doesn't always prioritize getting Clark's game to flourish. This isn't necessarily intentional sabotage. It could be a difference in basketball philosophy. It could be a coaching style that doesn't mesh well with a player like Clark. But the result is the same. A situation where the most talented player on the team sometimes seems to be in conflict with the system that's supposed to be elevating her. Reports from people close to the situation suggest that there's been friction. Not the kind of friction that makes headlines, but the kind that builds over time. The kind that comes from repeated situations where a coach makes decisions that a star player doesn't understand. The kind that comes from feeling like your coaching staff doesn't have a complete understanding of your capabilities. The kind that comes from knowing you could be doing more if you were in a different system. Games have been analyzed where the Fever didn't run a single play designed specifically for Clark in crucial moments. No off-ball screens to get her a catch and shoot. No designed actions to get her the ball in favorable situations. Just chaotic, unstructured offense. If that's happening intentionally, it suggests a coaching staff that's either incompetent or actively limiting their best player. Neither option is good. The difference between what's being said publicly and what's happening privately seems to be widening. Head coaches give press conferences that frame decisions one way. But when you watch the games and analyze the decisions objectively, the story doesn't always match. There's a gap between the narrative being presented and the reality of what's being done on the court. When that gap exists, it usually means someone isn't being truthful about what's actually happening. The organizational context matters because context determines trajectory. A talented player in a good situation can develop into a legend. A talented player in a bad situation can have their career derailed. Clark has the talent to be a legend regardless of her situation. But if the organizational dysfunction continues, it could affect her future in ways that go beyond just basketball statistics. When historians look back on women's basketball in this era, they're going to point to Caitlin Clark as a pivotal figure, not just because of what she's accomplished on the court, but because of what she represents for the sport as a whole. She arrived at a moment when women's basketball was hungry for transcendent talent, and she's delivered in ways that have rippled far beyond box scores and highlight reels. The viewership numbers tell part of the story. Games featuring Clark are drawing significantly more viewers than typical women's basketball broadcasts. Her college games set viewership records. Her professional games are being watched by people who don't normally follow women's basketball. She's attracted a demographic that the WNBA has been trying to reach for years. Casual fans are tuning in specifically to see her play. That's not something that happens for most athletes, regardless of sport or gender. But the impact goes deeper than just viewership. She's changing conversations about what's possible in women's athletics. She's forcing broadcasters to give women's basketball more prominent time slots. She's inspiring young girls to believe they can play at the highest levels. She's showing the world that women's basketball is compelling, exciting, and worthy of the same level of attention and respect as men's basketball. Every time she hits a shot from 79 feet out or makes a no-look pass from the logo, she's making an argument for why women's sports matter. She's proving through her play what advocates have been arguing for years. What's particularly interesting is the generational impact she's having. There's a cohort of young basketball players coming up right now who are watching Clark and seeing what's possible. They're learning that they can shoot from extreme ranges. They're learning that they can dominate at the highest level. They're learning that playing a high-intensity, aggressive style is not only acceptable, but celebrated. They're learning that the ceiling for what women can achieve in basketball is higher than they thought. She's essentially raising the ceiling for what the next generation of women's basketball players will aspire to achieve. The sponsorship and business implications are also worth considering. Companies are investing in Clark because she's marketable. She's compelling. She's media-friendly. She's transcendent. The investments in women's basketball broadcasting and apparel have increased partly because players like Clark have shown that there's genuine market interest in the sport. This creates more opportunities for future female athletes, which benefits everyone in the sport. The economic impact of her presence in the league extends far beyond her individual contracts. There's also a cultural significance to what she's doing that extends beyond basketball. In a time when there are constant debates about women in sports, about female athleticism, about whether women's sports deserve the same attention and resources as men's sports, Clark is providing a compelling answer through her play. She's showing that at the highest level of competition, women's basketball is thrilling, strategic, and entertaining. She's fighting battles on the court that extend into broader societal conversations. She's proving through excellence that women's sports deserve investment, attention, and respect. But perhaps the most important part of her legacy is still being written. She's 22 years old. She's already accomplished more than most players do in entire careers. She's already changed the trajectory of women's basketball, but her best basketball is almost certainly still ahead of her. She has years of development ahead. She has time to refine her craft, to understand the game at deeper levels, to become even more complete as a player. Imagine what she might accomplish over the next 10, 12, 15 years. Imagine how the game might evolve with her as a central figure. Imagine what records she might break. Imagine what games she might win. Imagine what moments she might create that define eras of basketball history. The potential is almost staggering when you think about it. Reports suggest that she's thinking bigger than just individual statistics. She wants to win championships. She wants to elevate her team beyond what anyone thought was possible. She wants to be part of changing the perception of women's basketball on a fundamental level. She wants her presence in the league to increase interest, increase investment, and increase opportunities for future generations of female athletes. She understands that her role extends beyond just being a great basketball player. The 79-foot buzzer beater will be remembered. The no-look passes will be replayed. The deep threes from impossible distances will be analyzed and celebrated for years to come. But perhaps her greatest legacy will be the players she inspires and the doors she opens for women's basketball as a whole. She arrived at exactly the moment the sport needed someone like her, transcendent, marketable, and undeniably great. And she's delivering on that moment in ways that will resonate for decades to come. But there's an unresolved question hanging over all of this. The organizational situation, the coaching dynamics, the unresolved contract situation, these aren't minor details. These are the things that will determine whether Clark gets to fulfill her complete potential, or whether she ends up being a great player in a flawed situation. The best case scenario is that everything gets resolved, the organization gets its act together, and Clark spends her prime years in an environment that maximizes her abilities. The concerning scenario is that the dysfunction continues, and one of the most talented players to ever play the sport doesn't get to reach her full ceiling because of external circumstances beyond her control. That's the story that's still unfolding. The 79-footer was a spectacular moment. But the real question is, what's going to happen next? Will the organization get it right? Will Clark find herself in a situation where her talent can fully flourish? Or will this era of women's basketball be defined by a transcendent player who didn't quite get everything she deserved? Caitlin Clark's 79-foot buzzer beater wasn't just a shot. It was a statement. It was the culmination of a young player arriving at the professional level and immediately demanding respect through undeniable excellence. From her shooting range to her playmaking, from her pressure performances to her basketball intelligence, she's redefining what's possible in women's basketball. The controversies and injury concerns are real. The organizational complications are real. But they don't diminish what she's already accomplished. What they do is add layers of complexity to her story. As she continues her career, the question isn't whether she's living up to expectations. She's exceeded them. The question is how much higher she can go and whether the environment she's in will allow her to reach those heights. Clark has shown us that the ceiling for women's basketball is higher than we thought. Every time she steps onto the court, she expands what we believe is possible. The 79-footer is just a moment in a much larger story that's still being written. And for now, we wait to see what comes next.